The American Economy in the 1970s, a documentary about crisis, change, and survival. The 1970s became one of the most important and difficult decades in the history of the United States economy. America entered the decade as one of the most powerful nations on Earth. The country had experienced decades of economic growth after World War II. Factories operated at full speed, suburbs expanded across the nation, and millions of families believed the American dream would continue forever. But during the 1970s, everything began to change. The economy slowed, prices exploded, factories struggled, and uncertainty spread across the country. For many Americans, the decade felt like the end of an era. At the beginning of the 1970s, the United States was already facing growing pressure. Government spending had increased dramatically during the Vietnam War while social programs expanded across the country. At the same time, inflation slowly began rising. Inflation occurs when the prices of goods and services increase over time, reducing the purchasing power of ordinary people. During the early years of the decade, Americans noticed that food, gasoline, housing, and everyday products were becoming more expensive. Families who once lived comfortably now struggled to keep up with rising costs. Then came one of the most important moments in modern economic history. In 1971, President Richard Nixon announced the end of the gold standard system that had supported the value of the American dollar since the end of World War II. For decades, foreign governments could exchange U.S. dollars for gold. But growing economic pressure made this system difficult to maintain. When Nixon ended the convertibility of dollars into gold, the global financial system changed forever. The decision shocked the world. At first, many Americans did not fully understand the consequences, but over time, the dollar became weaker, inflation increased further, and financial instability spread throughout the economy. Then another crisis arrived. In 1973, the oil crisis transformed daily life in America almost overnight. Several Middle Eastern oil-producing nations reduced oil exports to the United States during political tensions connected to the Middle East. As oil supplies dropped, gasoline prices exploded across America. The effects were immediate. Long lines formed at gas stations. Drivers waited for hours hoping to buy fuel. Some stations simply ran out of gasoline completely. Across the country, people suddenly realized how dependent modern America had become on oil. The crisis affected nearly every part of the economy. Factories faced rising transportation costs. Airlines struggled. Food prices increased. Heating homes became more expensive. Inflation accelerated rapidly. At the same time, unemployment also increased. Normally, inflation and unemployment do not rise together at high levels. But during the 1970s, America experienced both simultaneously in a phenomenon economists called stagflation. The word combined two ideas: economic stagnation and inflation. For many experts, stagflation became one of the most confusing economic problems of the century. Factories that once symbolized American strength began facing serious competition from overseas manufacturers, especially from countries like Japan and Germany. American car companies struggled as foreign automobiles became more popular because they used less fuel during the oil crisis. Cities built around manufacturing started suffering. In places like Detroit, factories reduced production while workers lost jobs that had once provided stable middle-class lives. Industrial America slowly began weakening. At the same time, ordinary Americans continued trying to maintain normal life. Families still watched television together each evening. Children still attended school. Shopping malls continued expanding across suburban areas. But beneath everyday life, financial anxiety was growing. Mortgage rates climbed higher. Borrowing money became more difficult. Saving money felt almost impossible for many households. By the late 1970s, inflation reached extremely high levels. Prices increased so rapidly that many Americans felt their paychecks lost value almost immediately after receiving them. The cost of food, gasoline, and housing became major national concerns. Politicians faced enormous pressure to solve the crisis. President Jimmy Carter warned Americans that the country faced a deep crisis of confidence. He encouraged energy conservation and asked citizens to reduce fuel consumption. Across the country, people searched for answers. Some blamed foreign oil dependence. Others blamed government spending. Others believed the nation itself was changing too quickly. The mood of the country became uncertain. Television news programs regularly discussed inflation, unemployment, oil shortages, and economic instability. Yet, despite the struggles, the 1970s also became a decade of transformation. Technology slowly advanced. New industries began emerging. Computers started appearing inside businesses and universities. While old industrial systems weakened, the foundations of a new economic future quietly began forming. Wall Street also experienced major changes during the decade. Financial markets became more complex as investors searched for ways to protect money against inflation. Gold prices rose dramatically as many people lost confidence in traditional currencies. The American economy seemed caught between two worlds, the fading industrial past and an uncertain technological future. Meanwhile, popular culture reflected the economic reality of the time. Movies during the 1970s often felt darker and more realistic than films from previous decades. Television shows discussed working-class struggles more openly. Music carried themes of frustration, uncertainty, and change. The optimism of the 1950s and early 1960s had faded. By the end of the decade, the Federal Reserve, America's central banking system, decided to take aggressive action against inflation. In 1979, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker introduced extremely high interest rates in an attempt to slow rising prices. The policy was painful. Borrowing money became extremely expensive. Businesses struggled. Unemployment increased further in the short term, but the strategy eventually helped reduce inflation and reshape the future of the American economy during the 1980s. The 1970s left a permanent mark on the United States. The decade changed how Americans viewed money, energy, industry, and economic stability. It exposed weaknesses hidden beneath decades of prosperity. It showed how global events could suddenly affect everyday life inside American homes, and it forced the country to adapt to a rapidly changing world. For many people who lived through the decade, the 1970s felt uncertain, difficult, and unpredictable. But historians now recognize the period as one of the most important turning points in modern American economic history. The factories, highways, suburbs, and industries built during earlier decades would never look exactly the same again. America was changing, and the economy of the 1970s